The alarm on my console started flashing red before my brother even finished his first sentence. I remember that clearly, because at the time I thought it was a technical fault. I was standing on the bridge of the Meridian, a human patrol ship stationed near the edge of our solar system, and every screen around me carried the same live broadcast. My brother, Daniel Bennett, the first human envoy ever invited to speak before the Galactic Council, was standing alone in a chamber the size of a small city. 9 billion people back on Earth were watching him. So was I. He looked calm. That was Daniel. He could stand in front of 1,000 alien delegates, creatures older than our written history, and speak as if he were chatting with a neighbor over a fence. He wore a plain gray suit, no medals, no weapons. He had told me before he left that he wanted the galaxy to see us as we truly were. Honest, open, hopeful. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. Humanity was young out there. Only 60 years had passed since first contact, since an alien survey ship stumbled across our little blue world and reported us to the Council. 60 years is nothing to them. The youngest species on the Council had been traveling between stars for 11,000 years. To them, we were an accident, a curiosity. Some of them used a worse word. They called us an infestation from a death world, because Earth, by their standards, is a nightmare planet. Crushing gravity, wild storms, diseases everywhere, predators on every continent. Most Council species evolved on gentle worlds. They could not understand how anything intelligent could come from a place like ours. Daniel believed that if we asked politely, if we showed patience and respect, they would let us in. A seat at the table, trade routes, protection, a future among the stars. He had worked his whole life for that single moment, and now he stood in the center of their great chamber, and he began to speak. His voice came through my console, soft and steady. He thanked them for the invitation. He spoke about Earth, about our oceans and our music, and our children. He said that humanity knew it was young, and that young species make mistakes, and that we wanted to learn from those who came before us. He said we came with open hands. I was so proud of him that my chest hurt. Then I noticed the silence. Council sessions are never silent. There are always hundreds of translators humming, delegates murmuring, the constant noise of 1,000 species sharing one room. But as Daniel spoke, the chamber grew quiet in a way that felt wrong. The camera drones drifted upward, showing the full hall, and I saw that the delegates were not listening the way you listen to a speech. They were watching him the way you watch something at the bottom of a cage. My first officer, a steady man named Oliver Hart, stepped up beside me. He said nothing, but I saw his jaw tighten. He felt it too. High above the chamber floor sat the Speaker of the Council, an ancient being from a species called the Vray, wrapped in robes of silver light. When Daniel finished his speech, the speaker did not thank him. It did not ask questions. It simply raised one long limb, and the entire hall stood at once, all 1,000 delegates, in perfect unison, as if they had rehearsed it. They had rehearsed it. I know that now. The speaker's voice filled every channel in the galaxy. It said that the petition of the human species had been heard. It said that the petition itself was an offense, that a species barely 60 years beyond its own sky had dared to ask for equality with the Eternal Council. It said the galaxy required order, and order required lessons, and lessons required examples. I remember gripping the edge of my console. I remember Oliver whispering, "Get him out of there," as if anyone could. Daniel understood before I did. I saw it in his face. He did not panic. He did not run. He straightened his jacket, the way he used to before school presentations when we were kids, and he looked directly into the nearest camera drone. He looked at 9 billion people. He looked at me. He said, "Whatever happens next, do not let it make you smaller." Then the floor beneath him lit up with a cold white glow, and the transmission from inside the chamber cut to the Council's official seal, and a single line of text in every human language. The lesson is delivered. Let all young species observe and remember. My brother was gone. They had ended his life in front of the entire galaxy, calmly, publicly, as a warning. Not because he threatened them, because he asked to be their equal. The bridge of the Meridian was completely silent. 20 officers stood frozen at their stations. Somewhere behind me, a young ensign was crying without making a sound. I could not feel my own hands. I kept staring at the screen, waiting for it to be a mistake, a translation error, a cruel test. It was not. Across the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds, alien crowds were celebrating. We saw the feeds. They cheered in city squares. Council commentators praised the speaker's wisdom. They said the humans would now understand their place. They said we would grieve loudly, the way primitive things do, and then we would bow, the way primitive things must. They were watching Earth, waiting for us to scream. Earth did not scream. That was the first thing that unsettled them, though they did not admit it yet. Every human news channel went dark for 1 full hour. No statements, no anger, no footage of crowds, just darkness, planet-wide, as if the whole world had closed its eyes. On my bridge, the main console chimed, a message from Earth Command, sent to every human vessel, every station, every colony, at the same moment. It was 7 words long. I have read millions of words in my life, and I will forget all of them before I forget those 7. Protocol Black is authorized. Come home now. Oliver read it over my shoulder. He turned to me slowly. He asked me if I knew what Protocol Black was. I told him the truth. I had no idea. It appeared in no manual I had ever studied, no training I had ever received. I was a commander in Earth's fleet, and I had never heard those words in my life. But something deep in me, something old and cold, understood that a door had just closed somewhere, and another one, much larger, had opened. I gave the order. The Meridian turned toward home. Around us, on every tracking screen, I watched hundreds of human ships do the same. Cargo haulers abandoned their trade routes mid-journey. Science vessels dropped their research and burned hard for Sol. Passenger liners, mining rigs, survey teams, every human ship in the galaxy, all turning at once, all moving in the same direction, like iron filings pulled by a hidden magnet. The alien traffic controllers noticed. Of course they noticed. Their transmissions filled our channels, first confused, then mocking. They said the humans were running home to hide. They said the Deathworlders had finally learned fear. One council officer sent an open broadcast laughing at us, saying that the lesson had worked perfectly, and that we should thank them for teaching it so cheaply, at the price of only 1 life. Only 1 life, my brother's life. I did not respond. No human ship responded. Not 1 vessel, not 1 station, not 1 colony sent a single word in reply. And I promise you, that silence frightened them more than any threat we could have made, even if they did not know why yet. 3 days later, the Meridian crossed the boundary of our solar system. I stood at the forward window as we passed the orbit of Neptune, and I looked out at the dark, and I said goodbye to my brother in the only way I could, quietly, privately, with the stars as witnesses. Then my console chimed again. New orders. My ship was to dock at a station that did not appear on any map I had ever seen, in a region of the outer dark that our charts marked as empty. Oliver looked at the coordinates, then at me. He said, "Commander Bennett, there is nothing out there." I looked at those 7 words from Earth Command still glowing on my screen, and I felt the cold thing in my chest turn over, and I answered him with the only thing I knew for certain anymore. I said, "I think we are about to find out how wrong we both are." The engines fired, and we flew into the dark, toward the empty place that was not empty, while behind us the galaxy laughed at the frightened humans running home, and ahead of us waited the answer that 60 years of quiet, patient, careful people had been building in silence, for a day they hoped would never come. The day had come. We flew for 11 hours into a region of space that every chart in the fleet listed as barren. No stations, no beacons, no traffic, just cold rock and darkness beyond the edge of the solar system, where sunlight is only a bright star among other stars. I stood watch the entire time. I could not have slept if I tried. Then our sensors began to fail. That is what I believed at first. The forward display showed shapes where no shapes should be, shadows against the star field, hundreds of them, then thousands. Oliver ran a diagnostic 3 times. The sensors were fine. The shadows were ships. I have served in Earth's fleet my entire adult life. I believed I knew every vessel humanity had ever built. Our official fleet numbered around 400 ships, modest patrol craft and transports. Nothing that would worry a council power. The council knew those numbers too. They inspected our shipyards every 2 years. They counted our hulls. They filed their reports and went home satisfied that the humans were small. What floated in the dark ahead of my ship was not 400 vessels. My tracking system stopped counting at 12,000 and asked me to confirm it was not malfunctioning. 12,000 ships, dark hulls that drank the starlight, designs I had never seen, built on a scale I had never imagined, hanging silently in the void like a sleeping forest. And between them, dozens of stations, each one larger than any structure in the official fleet registry, their windows glowing with quiet, patient light. Oliver said something under his breath that I will not repeat, but I shared the feeling completely. We docked at the largest station. A woman was waiting for me at the airlock. She was perhaps 60 years old, silver-haired, wearing a uniform with no rank markings at all, and when she introduced herself, my knees nearly gave out. Her name was Margaret Doyle. Every officer in the fleet knew that name. Admiral Margaret Doyle had died 14 years earlier in a reactor accident. There had been a state funeral. I had attended it. She saw my face and gave me a small, tired smile. She said the funeral had been lovely and that she was sorry for the deception, and sorrier still that it had ever been necessary. Then she said she was deeply sorry about Daniel, and unlike the 1,000 messages of sympathy I had received that week, hers sounded like she truly meant it. She led me through the station, and as we walked, she told me the truth about the last 60 years, and piece by piece, the world I thought I lived in came apart. She asked me if I had ever wondered why first contact went so smoothly, why humanity, famous for arguing about everything, had agreed so quickly and quietly to the Council's trade terms, inspection terms, border terms. I admitted I had always been told it was wisdom. She shook her head. It was not wisdom, she said. It was a decision. Within 1 year of first contact, she told me, Earth's leaders had gathered in secret and studied everything the Council showed us. And what they saw was not a community of equals. They saw an empire wearing the costume of a community. 1,000 client species who bowed, paid, and obeyed. A council that had not been challenged in 40,000 years and had quietly erased the last 3 species who tried. So Earth made a choice. In public, we would be exactly what the Council wanted. Small, polite, eager, harmless. And in private, in the deep cold beyond Neptune where no inspector ever looked, we would prepare for the day the mask came off. Not because we wanted war, because we had read their history, and their history said the day always came. Every trade mission for 60 years had carried mapping equipment. Every cultural exchange had carried observers. Every student we sent to their academies came home with more than a diploma. 60 years of smiling, bowing, and remembering everything. Margaret called it the longest quiet breath in human history. And the ships. She showed me the ships. The Council fights the way it has fought for 40,000 years, she explained, as we walked a gantry above a vessel so large its bow disappeared into the distance. Formal battle lines, ritual challenges, warfare as ceremony, refined into tradition, unchanged because no one dared change it. Their weapons were built to duel other Council weapons. Their crews came from soft worlds, where nothing had hunted them for 100 generations. Humans came from a world that tried to end us every single day for 200,000 years. Storms, plagues, famine, ice ages, predators. Everything on Earth that survived did so by being tougher, smarter, more stubborn, and harder to kill than the world around it. The Council called Earth a death world as an insult. Margaret said our engineers had taken it as a design brief. Human hulls were built to survive radiation that would cook a council crew in minutes, because our worst nuclear accidents had taught us how. Human ships could accelerate at rates that would break the bodies of species from gentle, low-gravity worlds. Human damage control assumed the ship would be hit, and hit hard, and keep fighting anyway, because that was how everything on Earth had always worked. You do not stop when you are hurt. You stop when you are done. I asked her the question that had been burning in me since the first shadow appeared on my sensors. 60 years, 12,000 ships. How did no one ever find this place? She laughed, and there was no humor in it at all, and she said, "Someone almost did." 19 years ago, she told me, a council inspection cruiser suffered an engine fault during a routine survey of our outer system, and its drift carried it off the approved corridor, out toward the dark, straight toward the construction yards. For 11 hours, the fate of our entire species rode on the sensor logs of one damaged alien ship. If it saw the yards and reported them, everything ended. 60 years of work, and probably Earth itself, because the Council did not forgive secrets, and it certainly would not forgive this one. Earth had a choice that night, she said, and it was the worst choice imaginable. Let the cruiser drift and pray its sensors stayed blind, or remove it and start the war 2 decades early with a fleet that was only half built. The command bunker on Earth went silent for an hour while the cruiser drifted closer, and the yard crews shut down every reactor, every light, every heartbeat of machinery, and 40,000 workers floated in the freezing dark of their own stations, breathing bottled air, not transmitting so much as a whisper, while an alien warship glided past their windows close enough to see its running lights. And then, Margaret said, the strangest thing in the history of our species happened. A human deep space tug, a civilian vessel with a crew of 6, answered the cruiser's distress call, arrived with spare parts, repaired the alien engine with cheerful conversation and terrible coffee, and towed the cruiser gently back onto its approved corridor before its drift carried it the final distance. The Council later gave those 6 civilians a commendation for service to galactic cooperation. The tug crew smiled at the ceremony and thanked them and went home. All 6 of them were intelligence officers. The engine fault had been repaired in exactly the position that kept the cruiser's sensor array pointed away from the yards for the entire operation, down to the degree, and the Council never suspected a thing, because who suspects the friendly little species that fixes your engine and apologizes for the coffee? That is what 60 years of discipline looks like, Margaret said. Not one leak, not one boast, not one drunken word in one bar, on one colony in 6 decades. An entire species kept one secret, together, because every man and woman who knew the truth understood the same simple thing. The day we were discovered before we were ready was the day the lesson would come for all of us. Then she took me to a briefing room, and on the table was a single folder, real paper, marked with 2 words, Protocol Black. I asked her what it was. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that 60 years ago, when Earth's leaders realized what the Council truly was, they had written a promise. If the Council ever moved from insult to bloodshed, if they ever took a human life as a display of power, then humanity would not protest, would not petition, and would not plead. Humanity would remove the Council's ability to ever do it again, completely, permanently. The formal name in the document was the Extermination Protocol, and the words made my skin go cold, because I did not yet know exactly what they meant, and I was afraid to ask. Margaret watched me read, and then she said the words that changed my life for the second time in 1 week. The fleet needed a commanding officer for the Vanguard, the first ships through the door. The Council of Earth had chosen me, not despite Daniel, she said, because of him. Because the galaxy had watched them take my brother, and now the galaxy would watch what his sister did about it. I thought about refusing. I want to be honest about that. I stood in that quiet room, and I thought about Daniel, who believed in peace so deeply that he walked unarmed into a room full of ancient predators and smiled at them. I asked myself whether he would want this, whether I was about to honor my brother or betray everything he stood for. Then I remembered his last words. Whatever happens next, do not let it make you smaller. The council believed that killing him would make us smaller, quieter, more obedient. If we bowed now, his death would work exactly as they designed it to work, and every young species in the galaxy would learn the same lesson forever. Bow, or be made an example. I signed the command acceptance with a steady hand, and I hated how steady it was. The night before the fleet launched, I could not sleep, so I walked the Resolute from bow to stern, deck by deck, without my rank showing, just a woman in a plain jacket wandering the corridors of a ship, preparing for history. I wanted to know who I was taking into this. I owed myself that, and I owed them more. In the hangar deck, I found a group of young pilots writing letters home, real letters, on real paper, because the censors had forbidden any electronic messages that might hint at what was coming. And there is something about a 19-year-old carefully choosing his last words to his mother in pencil that will remodel your soul, whether you consent to it or not. One of them, a boy named Samuel Price, saw me watching and asked, without recognizing me, whether I thought they would all come home. I told him the truth, which was no, not all, and he nodded, and went back to his letter, and added a line to it, and I have never asked him what the line was, though he survived the whole war and flies passenger routes now, and sends me a card every year on the anniversary of the launch. In the medical bay, I found the surgeons running drills on treating species that were not ours, alien anatomy charts covering every wall, because Margaret's orders were absolute. Any life we could save, we would save, including theirs, especially theirs. Our doctors were teaching themselves to heal the bodies of an enemy who had never once considered learning to heal ours. Nobody had ordered the level of dedication I saw in that room at 2 in the morning. It was simply there, the way gravity is there. And in the engine spaces, I found Grace Holloway asleep, sitting up, wrapped around a coolant pipe like it was a beloved pet, with a wrench still in her hand and calculations written in marker up her own forearm, and I took a blanket from a supply locker and put it over her myself, and she never knew, and I am revealing it now in writing because she can no longer put me on report for interfering with engineering personnel. That walk changed something in me. I had accepted this command out of grief, and grief is fuel, but fuel burns away. What I found in those corridors was better than fuel. 12,000 ships full of people who were not marching to avenge one man. They were standing up so that no family, on any world, human or otherwise, would ever again watch what my family had watched. Somewhere between the hangar deck and the engine room, this stopped being my brother's war and became something so much larger that my grief could finally set down its share of the weight and simply walk beside everyone else. 2 weeks later, I stood on the bridge of my new flagship, the Resolute, at the head of a formation that stretched farther than my eyes could follow. 12,000 ships, crewed by volunteers who had said goodbye to their families without being allowed to say why. Behind us, Earth hung small and blue and silent. The whole planet had gone quiet again, the way it went quiet the hour Daniel died. Not the silence of fear, the silence of a held breath. Margaret's voice came over the fleet channel, calm as a Sunday morning. She read out the authorization. She named the operation. And then she said, "All ships, the galaxy taught us a lesson. Time to show them our notes." I gave the order. 12,000 ships jumped at the same instant, and the darkness where humanity's hidden fleet had waited for 60 years was suddenly empty, and across 200 star systems at once, the Council's early warning network, the proud, ancient, unbeaten shield of the Eternal Empire, went dark in a single quiet moment, like candles pinched out one by fingers no one saw coming. On the bridge of the Resolute, nobody cheered. We had promised each other we would not cheer. This was not a celebration. This was work, the most serious work our species had ever done. I sat down in the command chair my brother would never see, and I spoke my first order of the war in a level voice. "All ships, this is Commander Claire Bennett. You know your targets. Move quietly, strike quickly, and remember who we are. We are not here for revenge. We are here to make sure no one ever holds a lesson like that again." The Resolute surged forward into Council space, and the war the galaxy thought could never happen began without a single word of warning, exactly 60 years after we started preparing for it, and exactly 19 days after they showed the universe what they thought a human life was worth. They were about to learn the exchange rate. The first battle of the war lasted 4 minutes, and the Council never fired a shot. Their frontier fortress at Kellen Gate had stood for 9,000 years. It guarded the main route between their inner worlds and our region of space, and its commanders had grown so comfortable that they ran drills only twice a year. Our ships arrived inside their defensive ring, not outside it, because 60 years of quiet mapping had found the gravitational blind spot their own charts had forgotten. We disabled their weapons, their engines, and their communications, and then we evacuated their crews into life pods and pointed the pods toward the nearest Council world with a message written on each hull in their own language. "We are coming. Stand aside or stand down." That message became famous. It was not what anyone expected from the grieving Death Worlders. There was no rage in it, no threats about suffering, just a fact, delivered politely, like a weather report. The Council responded the way they had responded to every challenge for 40,000 years. They gathered their grand fleet, 4,000 capital ships in gleaming formation, and they broadcast their intentions openly, because that was the honorable way, the ancient way. They named the place where they would crush us, a wide, calm stretch of space near a blue giant star, perfect for formal battle lines. They even sent us an invitation. I am not joking. It was a formal document, beautifully written, inviting the human fleet to be destroyed at the appointed time and place, as tradition required. We declined the invitation. That confused them. Instead, 3 days before their appointed battle, their Grand Fleet's supply convoys began to vanish. Not destroyed, vanished. Fuel carriers, ammunition transports, food ships, all of them slipping out of contact in quiet corners of space, their crews later found unharmed in life pods, their cargo gone. Human boarding teams had taken the ships whole, in the dark, without alarms, moving through maintenance shafts too cramped and too toxic for Council species, breathing air that would have dropped their marines in seconds. Our people came from a world of coal mines and deep caves and disaster response. Crawling through a poisoned tunnel in the dark was, for some of our veterans, simply a memory of home. By the day of the appointed battle, the Grand Fleet had fuel for 1 week and ammunition they were afraid to waste. They waited in their beautiful formation at the agreed place, and we simply did not come. You cannot imagine what that did to them. For 40,000 years, every enemy had come. Honor demanded it. We checked the honor rules carefully and found that we had never signed them. While their Grand Fleet floated in ceremonial readiness, guarding an empty patch of space, our squadrons moved through the frontier behind them like water through open fingers. We did not attack cities. I want that understood, because it mattered to us then, and it matters to me now. We took shipyards, weapons factories, military harbors, command stations. We evacuated every crew before their stations came apart. Margaret's standing order was posted on every human bridge. We are dismantling an empire, not punishing its servants. Anyone who surrenders goes home alive, every single one. And they did surrender, more and more of them, because word was spreading, and the word was strange and terrifying to them. The humans do not lose their tempers. The humans do not take revenge on captives. The humans treat war like a job, and they are horrifyingly good at their job, and nothing you do frightens them. Then came the night at the Silver Docks, and I nearly lost everything, including my own life. The Silver Docks were the crown of the Council's war industry, an orbital shipyard complex the size of a small moon, wrapped around a gas giant in a heavily defended system. Every capital ship in their Grand Fleet had been born there, across 9 centuries. Taking it would not just wound their war effort. It would end their ability to replace what they were losing. But the docks were guarded by something new, something their engineers had rushed into service specifically because of us, an automated defense grid that did not follow their honorable traditions, because machines have no honor to slow them down. It tracked anything that moved and fired without ritual, without warning, and without mercy. They had finally built something that fought like they thought we fought. We could not sneak past it. We could not outshoot it. So we did the one thing the grid's designers never modeled, because no council species would ever have considered it. We let it see us. 12 of our oldest ships, stripped of their crews and run by remote, charged the grid in a howling frontal assault, exactly the attack the machines were built to destroy. And while every automated gun in the system turned to feast on those empty hulls, 800 human volunteers crossed 40 kilometers of open vacuum in nothing but armored suits, drifting slow and cold among the debris of our own decoys, unpowered, silent, invisible to sensors that were busy gorging themselves on the loud, bright, empty ships we had fed them. I was in that debris field. Command regulations said I should not have been, and Oliver told me so, twice, in language that stretched the boundaries of military courtesy. But I had ordered 800 people to drift unpowered through an active weapons zone, and I have never in my life given an order I was not willing to follow myself. So I drifted with them, in the dark, with the guns flashing silently above us, close enough that I could see the reflection of the firing in the visors of the volunteers around me, and none of us could speak or transmit or do anything at all except fall very slowly toward the enemy and trust the math. A young specialist named Alice Turner drifted 3 meters to my left. Her suit's heater had failed an hour into the crossing, a flaw that would have meant death from cold for any council species long before reaching the docks. Alice was from northern Canada. When we finally reached the outer hull and could speak again, her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form words, and the first full sentence she managed was a complaint that this was still warmer than her grandmother's ice fishing cabin, and did anyone bring the thermos? 800 frozen, frightened people laughed inside their helmets on the hull of an enemy fortress, and then they got up and went to work, and that, more than any weapon we ever built, is the thing I wish the Council could have understood about us before they chose the path they chose. We took the control core of the Silver Docks in 90 minutes. The defense grid, captured intact, was switched off politely and permanently. 40,000 dock workers, all client species laborers, surrendered the moment they understood we were not going to harm them, and then something happened that no one ordered and no one predicted. The laborers began helping us, showing our engineers the systems, opening the sealed sections. One elderly dock foreman, a being from a species called the led my officers directly to the classified archives and stood there while we copied them, and when my intelligence chief asked him why, he said that his family had built ships for the Council for 200 generations, and that no one had ever once asked them if they wanted to, and that being asked, even by an invader, was the newest feeling of his very long life. That last part was what truly broke their confidence, and it broke it hardest at the Threshold Nebula. The Threshold is a storm of radiation and burning gas, a place Council ships avoid by a margin of light years because their gentle world biology cannot survive even the outer edge of it. Their war doctrine listed it as impassable terrain, and so their strategists treated it like a wall. They anchored the entire defense of their inner territories against that wall, certain that nothing could come through it. Our fleet sailed into the storm. I will not pretend it was easy. It was the hardest voyage of my life. For 9 days, the Resolute shook and groaned around us, while radiation levels outside climbed past anything in the Council's manuals. Our hulls were built for it, layered and shielded by engineers who had studied every disaster in human history. Our crews were dosed with treatments developed across a century of medicine on a world that had always been trying to poison us. Even so, we felt it. Headaches, exhaustion, the constant hum of a ship enduring what ships were never meant to endure. On the 6th day, deep in the worst of the storm, the cruiser Dauntless lost her forward shielding. A wave of burning gas denser than anything in our models rolled over the formation, and her outer plating failed in 3 places, and suddenly one of my ships was drowning in the middle of an ocean where no rescue was supposed to be possible. Her captain, a quiet man named Henry Cole, came on the fleet channel with a voice so calm it broke my heart, listing his damage like a grocery list, and finishing with a sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. He said, "Commander, recommend the fleet maintain course. We knew the price of the ticket when we bought it." I did not maintain course. The Resolute turned in the storm, which our own manuals said was impossible, and Grace Holloway pushed the reactor 40% past its rated ceiling, and we put our own hull between the Dauntless and the burning current like a mother animal shielding her young, and we held that position for 6 hours while damage teams crossed between the ships through conditions that had no name in any safety regulation ever written. We took her whole crew aboard, every single one, and then her engineers refused to leave, went back, and saved the ship itself, because Henry Cole announced that he had commanded the Dauntless for 11 years, and he was not going to walk out of a storm without her. Grace found me on the bridge afterward, covered in coolant, half deaf from the engine spaces, and she grinned at me and said the reactor had held together with science, spite, and tape, and after what I had watched her do for 6 hours, I no longer believed she was joking about the tape, and I no longer cared. On the 9th day, we came out of the far side of the storm, directly inside the Council's inner defense line, behind every gun they owned, all of which were pointed the other way. Their inner fleet commander was an admiral named Vesh Arun, a decorated officer from one of the Council's founding species, with 9 centuries of service. When our ships appeared on his screens, rising out of the impassable wall like ghosts out of deep water, his fleet's formation simply fell apart, not from damage, from disbelief. Crews abandoned stations. Captains flooded the channels asking for orders that never came, because Vesh Arun spent the first 3 minutes of the engagement convinced his sensors had failed. In his 40,000-year-old rulebook, we were not merely unexpected, we were impossible. We captured his flagship intact. My boarding teams reached his command deck to find the admiral sitting calmly in his chair, having ordered his crew to stand down to save their lives, which I respected then and still respect now. He was brought aboard the Resolute, and I met him in a plain conference room, and that meeting has never left me. He was tall and gray-skinned, with deep golden eyes, and he studied me for a long moment before he spoke. He said, "You are the sibling of the Envoy." I said I was. He was quiet, and then he asked the question his whole civilization was asking. Why do you keep coming? The lesson was one life, regrettable perhaps, but one life. You have made your point many times over. Any other species would have accepted terms by now. Why do humans keep coming? I thought about how to answer him. I thought about Daniel in his plain gray suit, straightening his jacket. I thought about the celebration crowds in their city squares. I told him this. On our world, when something hunts one member of the group does not negotiate with it, because our world taught us, over 200,000 years, exactly what happens to groups that do. You did not take one life. You announced, in front of every young species in the galaxy, that any of our lives could be taken, at any time, as a teaching aid. So we are not here to make a point. You made the point. We are simply erasing the classroom. He looked at me for a long time, and then he said, quietly, that in 900 years of service, he had never once been afraid of an enemy, and that he was afraid now, and that the strangest part was that I had said all of it without any anger at all. I did not tell him the truth, which was that the anger was there. Every hour of every day, a quiet fire I kept locked in a room in my chest, because Daniel had asked me not to let them make me smaller, and rage would have made me smaller. Discipline was the only tribute I could still pay him. That night, alone in my cabin, I read the full text of Protocol Black for the first time. All of it, including the final section that Margaret had never discussed with me and that I had never let myself think about. The protocol did not stop at fleets and fortresses. Its last page authorized, if Earth's Council so voted, the complete and permanent end of the Council's founding species themselves. Not their government, them. The word extermination in the title was not a metaphor, and somewhere behind me, on my quiet blue homeworld, people I had never met were beginning to argue about that final page, and the argument was not going the way I had assumed it would. I sat with that document for a long time in the dark, and for the first time since Daniel died, I was not afraid of the council. I was afraid of us. One more thing happened after the threshold, before the diplomacy began, and I have to tell it, because the galaxy still talks about it, and because it explains everything that came afterward better than any treaty ever could. We were escorting a convoy of hospital ships and transports to a neutral system. The transports carried 11,000 council prisoners of war, crews we had captured across a dozen engagements, being moved to a safe world for the duration, fed, treated, and housed under the same standards as our own people, because Margaret's orders had never bent once on that point. Among the prisoners was Admiral Vesh Arun himself. Halfway through the passage, a rogue council battle group found us. They were the last true believers, a faction of young commanders from the founding castes who had rejected every order to regroup, and they had decided that if the war was lost, they would at least erase its greatest humiliation. They were not coming for my warships. Their attack vector made that clear within the first minute. They were coming for the transports. They intended to destroy 11,000 of their own captured people, because in the mathematics of the old empire, prisoners who had surrendered to the Death Worlders were a stain, and stains are removed. Their commander broadcast it openly, proudly, calling it a cleansing of dishonor. My escort force was outnumbered 3-1, and I had the entire convoy's speed limited by hospital ships that could not run. Every doctrine ever written said I should abandon the transports, save the hospital ships in my combat hulls, and accept the loss, because the cargo, by the cold arithmetic of war, was enemy personnel. We formed a wall instead. Every human warship I had, placed in a line between a council attack force and 11,000 council prisoners, and we held that line for 2 hours of the hardest fighting of the entire war, taking hits meant for the people we had defeated, bleeding for the crews we had captured. The Dauntless, repaired and stubborn as her captain, took the worst of it shielding a transport whose engines had failed, and Henry Cole's voice on the fleet channel, reporting damage in his grocery list tone, is a recording they still play at the Academy. And then the moment came that changed the galaxy. Aboard the largest transport, Vesh Arun watched through a viewport as human ships burned to protect him from his own people, and the old admiral made a decision. He requested access to a transmitter, and my convoy commander, in the middle of a battle, with no time to consult anyone, made a decision of her own and granted it. Vesh Arun's voice went out across open channels, identified itself with 900 years of rank and honors, and addressed the attacking battle group directly. He told them what he was watching. He told them who was dying for whom, and then he said, in the formal high speech of the founding castes, words that no council officer had ever spoken in 40,000 years. He said, "The enemy has shown me more honor in defeat than my civilization showed them in peace, and I hereby transfer my allegiance and my name and my 9 centuries to the protection of theirs, and if you continue this attack, you attack my flag." A third of the rogue battle group broke off on the spot. The remainder pressed the attack and were defeated by a defense that fought, if anything, harder after that transmission than before it. When it was over, and the convoy limped into the neutral system with every single transport intact, 11,000 council prisoners lined the viewports of their ships in silence, watching the scarred human warships take up their patrol stations, and then, ship by ship, deck by deck, they did something their species does at funerals and coronations and nothing in between. They pressed their palms flat against the glass, all of them at once, thousands of hands against 100 windows, facing us. I asked Vesh Arun later what it meant. He said there is no exact translation, but the closest human words would be, "We see you, and we will not forget that we saw." After the threshold, the empire began to come apart at the seams, and it came apart in a way none of us had planned for. The client species, the hundreds of smaller races who had bowed to the council for thousands of years, started reaching out to us. quietly at first, coded messages passed through neutral traders. Then openly, whole systems declaring neutrality. Then whole species arriving at our forward stations, asking to speak with the humans, asking for terms, asking, in the careful words of beings who had never been allowed to ask for anything, whether the galaxy was truly allowed to change. And because I commanded the vanguard, they came to me. I had trained my whole life to fight. Nothing had trained me to sit across a table from the trembling ambassador of a species 4 times older than human civilization, while she asked me whether her people would be punished for the crimes of their masters. Her name, as close as our translators could render it, was Celis, and her species had built the Council's ships for 6,000 years, not because they wished to, but because refusal had never been survivable. I told her that her people would build whatever they chose to build from now on, or nothing at all, and that no human would ever punish a servant for the sins of the ones holding the leash. She did not believe me. I could see it. So I gave her something no council power had ever given a client species. I gave her a written promise, signed, witnessed, and broadcast openly, and then I asked her to tell every species she knew to demand the same. Within a month, I was spending more hours negotiating than fighting. My bridge crew joked that the Resolute had become the strangest embassy in history. Oliver said one evening that I was starting to sound like my brother, and he meant it kindly, and it hit me so hard I had to leave the room. The Council's founding castes noticed what was happening, of course. They could not defeat our fleet, but they understood something their admirals did not, which is that the war was no longer being decided by ships. It was being decided by trust. Every species that came to my table and left with a signed promise was a pillar pulled out from under their 40,000-year-old throne. So they stopped aiming at our ships and aimed at the table instead. They aimed at me. It happened during the neutrality talks with the Kesran, a proud, cautious species who had insisted on meeting aboard their own station, on their own soil, as a matter of dignity. Margaret advised against it. Oliver flatly begged me not to go. I went, because Celis had taught me that these species had spent their entire history being told where they were allowed to stand, and if I demanded that they come to me, I was just a new voice giving the same old order. The talks went beautifully for 3 hours. Then a service drone crossed the chamber on a routine path, and my security chief, a former mine rescue specialist named Edith Grant, noticed that its shadow was wrong. That is the actual detail. The shadow. The drone was carrying more mass than its model should carry, and Edith had spent 20 years in collapsing tunnels, learning that when a detail is wrong, you move first and check later. She crossed the chamber in 3 strides, seized the drone with both hands, and hurled herself with it into the open shaft of a cargo lift, and the device meant for me went off 40 meters down, in an empty steel column, with her still holding it. Edith survived. I want to say that immediately, because I could not bear to tell this story otherwise. Her suit, human-made, absorbed what no council armor would have absorbed, and she came out of that shaft with a broken arm, a ruined suit, and a temper that station medics still probably discuss in hushed voices. But the room she saved erupted into chaos, and in that chaos, the Kesran delegation did something extraordinary. They did not evacuate their own leaders first. They formed a living wall around me, around the human, on their own station, against an attack ordered by their own former masters. Their senior delegate, an elderly female named Vos Ka, stood in front of me with her arms spread and shouted at her own security forces to protect the guest, and her voice cracked when she did it, because she was afraid, and she stood there anyway. The attack was traced within a day. The evidence led directly back to the founding caste's inner circle, and they did not even deny it skillfully. And that clumsy, desperate act did more damage to the Council than the loss of the Silver Docks, because every client species in the galaxy now saw the truth side by side in a single news cycle. The humans sign promises and keep them. The masters plant weapons at peace talks. 11 species declared for the accord that week. The Kesran were first, and Voska signed with her injured arm in a sling, having refused treatment until Edith Grant had been seen to, and those two women, one human and one not, are close friends to this day, and they argue about card games in a way that frightens junior officers of both species. Because he was right, and because of what I had found 2 weeks earlier. Daniel's personal effects had finally been released to me, everything from his diplomatic quarters, sealed and shipped to the Resolute. Most of it was exactly what I expected: books, clothes, a photograph of the two of us as children, standing in our grandmother's garden, but his working tablet contained an encrypted folder, locked with a phrase only I would know, the name of a dog we had as children, and inside that folder was a series of private journals, and inside those journals was the truth. Daniel knew. He had known for at least a year that the council was likely to refuse us, and he had come to believe, from 100 small signals and quiet warnings from sympathetic delegates, that they might go further than refusal. One entry, written a month before he left, said it plainly. If they choose to make an example of me, they will do it publicly, because cruelty in private is useless to them. And a public cruelty, witnessed by every client species at once, may do what 1,000 years of quiet resentment has not. It may show the galaxy exactly what sits on that high seat. If the price of that truth is one career diplomat from a small blue planet, history has charged far more for far less. He went anyway. He stood in that chamber knowing what might be waiting, and he smiled at them, and he spoke about our oceans and our music, and he let them show the galaxy who they were. His final entry was addressed to me. He wrote, "Ellie, if you are reading this, then it went the way I feared, and knowing our people, something enormous is now in motion, and knowing you, you are standing at the front of it. So I am asking you for one thing, not as a diplomat, but as your brother. We are dangerous. We have always been dangerous. That is exactly why we have to be better. Do not let my death become an excuse to become what they are. Make it the reason we never do." I read that entry perhaps 100 times, and I was still not ready for what came next. The Council's core territory had shrunk to a single system by then, their ancient homeworld and its defenses, the seat of the Speaker and the founding castes. Their fleets were gone, captured, surrendered, or scattered. Their client species had abandoned them almost entirely. The war, as a war, was over, and everyone in the galaxy knew it. What remained was the question of the ending, and Earth had been debating that question for months, in a planet-wide argument that I had followed from light years away with growing dread. The vote came through on a quiet watch, in the middle of the ship's night. Margaret delivered it to me herself, by direct channel, and her face told me the result before her words did. Earth's council had voted, by a narrow margin, to invoke the final section of Protocol Black. The fleet was ordered to proceed to the council homeworld and end the founding species. Permanently. The official reasoning ran for 40 pages. It spoke of 40,000 years of quiet erasures, of the 3 young species before us, who had asked for equality and simply disappeared from history, of the certainty that mercy now would mean repetition later. It was written carefully, logically, by frightened, grieving, serious people, and I understood every line of it, and my hands were shaking before I finished the second page. Margaret asked me if I had heard the order. I said I had. She was silent for a moment, and then she said something that was not in any regulation. She said, "Claire, I am transmitting the order because it is my duty. I am not telling you what to do with it," and she ended the transmission. I sat alone in my quarters with 2 documents open in front of me. Earth's order on the left, Daniel's last letter on the right. Outside my window, 12,000 ships waited for my word, and behind them waited our whole species, and behind our species waited the watching galaxy, every client race, every young species, all of them about to learn what humanity truly was, not from our speeches, but from what we did next, at the one moment in history when absolutely no one could stop us from doing anything we wanted. That is the moment that reveals a species, not when it is weak and asking, when it is strong and choosing. I thought about the crowds that had cheered when Daniel died. I thought about how good it would feel, for about a day, to give the order. I am being honest with you. Part of me wanted to. The quiet fire in the locked room of my chest wanted very badly to be let out, and it had a key now, signed by my own government. Then I thought about a line from Daniel's journal, the one I had underlined without realizing I was doing it. Do not let my death become an excuse to become what they are. I stood up. I walked to my bridge. My crew came to attention, and I saw in their faces that they already knew about the order, because ships carry news faster than light carries anything. Oliver looked at me and asked, very quietly, for our heading. I gave him coordinates. He entered them, and then he paused and turned and looked at me, because the coordinates were not an attack position. They were a blocking position, directly between the assembled human armada and the Council homeworld, broadside on, shields up, weapons cold. I opened a channel to my vanguard squadrons, the ships that had followed me through the threshold storm and 100 battles since, and I told them what I was about to do, and I told them that any captain who wished to stand aside could do so with honor and my blessing, and that I would face whatever came next alone if I had to. Not one ship left the formation. Every single one of them moved with me. And so, on a gray morning by ship's time, the strangest formation in human history assembled itself in the dark above an alien world. On one side, the largest fleet our species had ever built, carrying a lawful order from Earth itself. On the other side, one battle group, mine, standing in its path, and between us, silence, while 9 billion humans and 10,000 billion others watched to find out what we were. The whole galaxy was watching us again, the way it had watched a man in a plain gray suit straighten his jacket. The broadcast drones drifted between the two fleets. Cameras live on every channel in known space, and I realized, standing on my bridge, that history had built a mirror. It had taken the exact shape of the moment my brother died and turned it around to face us. An audience of every species, a single figure standing in an open space. A power that could do anything it wanted, deciding what it wanted to do. The Armada's acting commander was an admiral named Edward Marsh, a decent man I had known for 20 years, and his face on my screen was not angry. It was exhausted and torn. He told me he had his orders. I told him I knew. He asked me, as a friend, to move my ships, because he did not want the last battle of this war to be the only one fought between human beings. I told him I would not move, and that if Earth wanted the Council homeworld, the fleet would have to go through people who had bled beside them, on live broadcast, in front of every client species we had just promised a better galaxy. And then I asked him for 1 hour and one open channel before anyone did anything that could never be undone. He gave me the hour. I will always love him for that hour. I had no speech prepared. I want that on the record. Daniel was the speaker in our family. I stood in the center of my bridge, in front of a camera drone, addressing my own species and every other species at the same time, and I simply told the truth, the way you would tell it to a friend at a kitchen table. I told them who I was, not Commander Bennett, Claire, the younger sister of the man in the gray suit. I reminded them of what he said in his last moment, because the galaxy had heard it too, and I did not want anyone to forget it. Whatever happens next, do not let it make you smaller. Then I talked about the order sitting in my ship's system, and I did something no one expected. I defended it. I told the galaxy that Earth's fear was not madness. I read out the names of the 3 young species who had petitioned the Council before us, the ones who no longer exist, whose worlds the Council quietly emptied, and whose names survive only in salvaged records our intelligence teams had spent 60 years recovering. I let the galaxy sit with those names. The crowds who had cheered at my brother's death had never even heard them. That was the point of the erasures. That was what we were afraid of becoming the 4th entry in. And then I said, But an order can be lawful and still be wrong, but fear can be justified and still be a poor architect. But the protocol on my screen was written by people who had just watched their envoy die, and it was named in grief. And grief is honest, but grief should not draft the ending of a species. I said, the Extermination protocol will be executed today, in full, as written in its first pages, not its last. Because what Earth actually swore, 60 years ago, was to remove forever the Council's ability to do what it did, and that ability was never carried in their bodies. It was carried in their thrones. So here is what ends today, I said, and I named it all. The Council as an institution, the High Seat, the founding caste's rule, the tribute system that had bled 1,000 species for 40,000 years, the doctrine of lessons. Every structure, every office, every fleet, every claim of authority beyond their own single world, all of it, dismantled, permanently, under supervision, with the same thoroughness we brought to the threshold storm. Their species would live, on their own world, under their own sky, with exactly the standing they once assigned to us. A young species, in effect, starting over, welcome to petition the new galaxy for a seat at the table, whenever they were ready to ask politely. The galaxy would be guaranteed by a new accord, open to every species, client or free, drafted in the open, on one condition that was not negotiable: no lessons. No erasures, no species ever again standing alone in a chamber while power decided what its life was worth. And then I addressed Earth directly, my own people, 9 billion of them, and I asked them the only question that had ever mattered in this war. They feared us because we could destroy anything, I said. Let them respect us because we chose not to. That choice is the only weapon they can never capture, never copy, and never take. My brother walked into their chamber unarmed on purpose. He was not naive. He was showing them the most dangerous thing our species owns: restraint, freely chosen, by people strong enough to have a choice. I finished, and the channel stayed open, and for a long moment, nothing in the galaxy made a sound. Then a single targeting alarm shrieked across my bridge, and the moment nearly shattered. One ship in the Armada had gone weapons hot. The destroyer Halberd, commanded by a captain named Peter Vance, a man who had lost his wife and both of his sons at a frontier station in the first month of the war, when a retreating Council squadron had chosen, in violation of even their own traditions, to fire on a civilian dock as they fled. Peter had fought brilliantly and correctly for the entire war, and he had buried his family in 3 separate ceremonies, and now he sat at the edge of the ending, with a lawful order on his screen telling him he was allowed to make the people responsible disappear forever, and one voice, mine, telling him to let them live. His targeting array locked onto the Council homeworld, and every ship in both formations saw it happen, and 30 seconds of galactic history balanced on the grief of one good man. I did not order anyone to stop him. I want that understood, because what happened next matters more than anything else in this story. I opened a private channel instead, ship to ship, and I said, "Peter, this is Claire, and I am not speaking as your commander. I am speaking as someone else who lost family to that world down there, and I am asking you to hear one thing before you decide. If you fire, you will feel better for exactly 1 day. I know, because I have wanted to fire for a year, and then you will spend every remaining day knowing that the last thing your sons ever taught anyone is that grief pulls triggers. Or you can stand down, and the last thing they teach the galaxy is that a man who had every reason in the universe to fire chose not to, and no one in history will ever be able to argue with what that means. Your family gets one legacy, Peter. You are choosing it right now." For 9 seconds, nothing happened. I counted them. I will always count them. Then the Halberd's weapons went cold, and Peter Vance's voice came over the open fleet channel, rough and quiet, and he said, "This is Halberd," standing down, and then, after a pause, he added 4 words that spread across the galaxy faster than any battle report of the entire war. He said, "For Mara and the boys." There was no cheering. There was something better. Across 2 fleets, thousands of ships switched on their exterior lights at once, every hull blazing in the dark, an old Earth fleet tradition for honoring the lost, and the client species watching did not know the custom, but they understood it instantly, because grief, it turns out, is the one language that has never needed translation. The first formal response did not come from Earth, it came from the Armada. One by one, the capital ships facing my formation went weapons cold, their targeting arrays shutting down in slow ripples across the fleet, captains making their choice before their government did. Edward Marsh appeared on my screen, and he did not say anything about orders. He said, "Well, Claire, I suppose we had better go arrest an empire," and his flagship turned, gracefully, to stand beside mine instead of against it. Earth's reply came 4 hours later. The council had reconvened in emergency session before I had even finished speaking. The final section of Protocol Black was struck from the document by unanimous vote, and I am told the chamber stood in silence for 1 full minute afterward, and I am told it did not feel like defeat, and I believe that, because I know exactly what that silence feels like. It is the sound of a species exhaling after holding its breath for 60 years. The council homeworld surrendered without a shot. The speaker was brought out of the high chamber by its own guards, who had watched my broadcast like everyone else. The founding castes signed the instruments of dissolution in their ancient hall, and the client species sent witnesses, hundreds of them, standing in rows where they had once been permitted only to kneel, watching 40,000 years of empire end with the stroke of a pen and no cheering at all, because we had asked for no cheering, and by then the galaxy had learned that when humans ask quietly, it is worth listening. Before the signing, I asked for one meeting that was not on any official schedule, and it was granted, because at that point in history very little was refused to me, which is a dangerous condition for any person and one I was eager to be rid of. I met the speaker. It was held in a small, plain room at my request, because I did not want thrones or chambers or ceremony anywhere near this conversation. The being who had ordered my brother's death was brought in without robes of silver light, without attendants, without the architecture of 40,000 years of unquestioned power, and what remained when all of that was stripped away was simply an old creature, tall and thin and dry as autumn, with eyes that had watched 100 species rise and kneel. It spoke first. It told me it had expected to be dead by now, and that it did not understand why it was not, and that the not understanding was, it admitted, the first genuinely new experience it had had in 11,000 years. Then it asked me the question it had clearly prepared, the one it had been turning over through every day of its captivity. It asked whether I had spared its people as strategy, to bind the client species to us through mercy, and it said that if so, it wished me to know that it recognized the move, and respected it, because it was exactly what the council would have done in its early centuries, before power made cleverness unnecessary. I let the silence sit for a while, because I had learned by then that silence is honest in a way that answers rarely are, and then I told it the truth. I said that it was still making the same mistake, in a small room after losing everything, that it had made in a grand chamber while holding everything. It still believed that every choice was a move, that mercy must be a lever, that restraint must be a mask over appetite, because for 40,000 years it had lived inside a system where those things were true, and it had mistaken that system for the universe. My brother stood in front of you unarmed, I said, and you saw a tactic. My species held its fire above your world, and you see a strategy. You have spent 11,000 years unable to imagine that anyone, anywhere, might simply decide to be better than they have to be. And that failure of imagination, I told it, that is the real thing we defeated. Your fleets were never the empire. That was. The speaker looked at me for a long, long time, and something moved behind those ancient eyes that I cannot name, and it finally said, in a voice gone very quiet, that it had ordered the lesson in the chamber because the envoy's speech had frightened it, and it had never in 11,000 years admitted to being frightened, and it was admitting it now, to me, in a small plain room, because it suspected this was the only apology it was still capable of forming. I told it that its apology was noted, and that it was addressed to the wrong person, and that the person it belonged to had already answered it in advance, on the day it happened, in front of the entire galaxy. Whatever happens next, do not let it make you smaller. And then I stood up and left, and I felt the last of the fire in the locked room of my chest go out, not with a roar, but the way a candle goes out when the wax is finally spent, and I walked down a corridor lined with guards from a dozen species, out into the light of an alien sun, breathing easily for the first time in a year. There was one more thing to do, and I insisted on doing it myself. The execution chamber still existed, the great hall where 1,000 delegates once stood in rehearsed unison. There were proposals to destroy it. Some of the client species wanted it erased, understandably. Earth's council left the decision to me, which I suspect was Margaret's doing, and I chose to keep it, every stone of it. Because erasing history was their way, and remembering is ours. We renamed it. It is called the Bennett Hall now, and it is the founding chamber of the new Accord, neutral ground owned by no species, guarded by volunteers from 100 worlds. The spot where my brother stood is marked by a simple circle of plain gray stone, the color of his suit, and by law, anyone of any species may stand in that circle and speak, and while they stand there, no power in the galaxy may silence them. It is the most protected place in known space. We made the site of the lesson into the one place where lessons like that can never be taught again. On the day the accord was signed, 300 species sent delegates, and when the ceremonies were done, they asked me to speak, and I stood in the gray circle where he stood, in a plain gray suit I had made for the occasion, and I looked into the same cameras he looked into, carrying his last words out to the same watching galaxy. I told them about a boy who practiced speeches in our grandmother's garden with a dog for an audience. I told them he believed, before any of our fleets existed, before any of our victories, that the galaxy could be better than it was, and that he purchased the proof of it at the highest price a person can pay, on purpose, with his eyes open, because that is what the gentlest member of a dangerous species looks like. And then I finished the speech he never got to complete. I had his notes. He had written an ending he never reached, and I read it in that hall, word for word, in his name, and the last line of it was this: "We are a young species, and we are asking for a seat at your table, and we promise you that if you let us in, we will spend our whole future proving that you were right to say yes." I looked up from his notes then, at the delegates of 300 worlds, at the empty high seat that would never be filled again, and I added the only words of my own that I allowed myself that day. "My brother came here asking for a seat at your table," I said. "You should have just said yes." They say the silence afterward lasted a long time, and that it was the good kind, the held breath kind, the kind that comes before something begins. I would not know exactly how long it lasted. I was looking at the gray circle under my feet, and I was telling my brother that we did it, that nobody made us smaller, and that the door he knocked on with his life now stands open forever,